this past year. Now, thank you. We've got two fantastic speakers today. Firstly, we've got Charlie Kimber, who is the National Secretary for the SWP, and he's on the Central Committee. He'll be speaking to us for about 25 minutes on Marx, Crisis and Revolution. Then we've got Karen Reissmann, who is going to speak for about 10 minutes. She's a UNISON National Secretary, but will be speaking on a personal capacity. She's a mental health nurse from Bolton, and some of you may recognise her for her campaign about 7 years ago. Now, if I'd like to bring in... You first, you'd like to go first. Okay, Karen Reissmann first.
I started nursing in 1982 as a student nurse, January 1982, and in March 1982 we had our first national health service strike. And I've waited quite a long time, being a union activist, since 1982 for our second national health service strike. And now's 2011, and finally, after all the battles and fights and attacks and governments that have come and gone, and never mind all the managers and all the other people who've come and gone, we're at the stage now where not only have we got a national health service strike, we are joined with a national teachers' strike, with a national civil service strike, with a national firefighters' strike. There will be 3.3 million people who are being balloted or have already been balloted to come out on strike, the first day of which is planned for the 30th of November. And I think it's easy to just let that roll off your tongue like it doesn't mean anything. And I suppose one of the things that Dave Prentice said, who I think recognised the enormity of what's going on at the moment, he said that there is not enough envelopes in the whole of Great Britain to ballot just the Unison bit of that ballot, which is 1.1 million members, and we have to have an envelope to send it back, so it's 2.2 million envelopes. But there are not enough envelopes in Britain, and the Electoral Reform Society have had to order specially in order to get the envelopes, in order to send the ballots out that are being sent out this week. And I think that just gives you an idea of the scale of what's going on at the moment. And I think the fact that it is going on that scale makes it a million times easier to argue for people to vote yes. One of the things that strikes me when we were out on strike in 1982 is that during Thatcher's time, and Thatcher had a majority of 140 MPs, unlike this government that is a minority government, Thatcher was much more wary about us, and she took on workers one at a time. So when we were out on strike in 1982, there were no other workers out on strike with us. Health workers were out on our own, and we won or lost on our own. And they worked their way one at a time through the trade unions, through the industries, until they got to the miners and the dockers. I think this government have, I suppose, made a mistake. Although they've made a mistake thinking that the unions that have sat on their hands for the last 29 years might continue to sit on their hands. I don't think they realise quite how pissed off people are and quite how worried they are about the future. One of the things when we do union meetings now is you talk to people about, you might be nervous about going out on strike, but are you nervous about not going out on strike and doing nothing and just letting the world carry on the way it is? And there is nobody that feels that if you just sit back and do nothing, that it will be okay and that they will be all right. People know that things they've taken for granted for years are now being taken away. And that's why November the 30th has such great significance. And one of the huge advantages for us is that for once in a long time, although I think there have been moments before, there is some agreement and some shared aim from people like us who want to fight for a yes vote and want to get a big strike with the people at the top of the union, that there is an agreement that we need to do whatever we can to get to talk to union members, to get them to vote yes, and to get them to come out on November the 30th as the first step of that campaign. And that allows people who might have felt that there's nothing they can do, that they're very limited, that it's hard to do anything. It creates opportunities. Anybody can put on a pensions meeting in any workplace at the moment. Often, managers will cooperate in putting those meetings on. One of the health centres I did a meeting at, it was the manager who asked me to do it, it was the manager who sent the email round, and it was the manager who told people to go to it and book the room. And that's because her pension is at threat, and she's actually got a much better pension than probably anybody in this room. So she stands to lose more than we lose. So it is easy to have those meetings at the moment. And when you have them, it is easy to win an argument about a yes vote. You have to talk about the big picture. You have to talk about the rich who've got away with their millions. If they want to rob people of their pensions, then just the tax relief on all public sector workers is 4.6 billion. The tax relief on the top 1% of Britain is 10 billion, more than twice as much. If they want to steal from pensioners, then steal from the top 1%. Don't come to us first, because they can afford it and we can't. And people understand that. They see the bankers getting away with their billions. They see the Tories, their millionaire friends and themselves raking it in while we're having to cut further and further. And I think it's created, because of the scale of what's going on at the moment, it has created a buzz at work that I've not felt, sort of certainly in the workplace I'm in at the moment, that I've been in for 2.5 years, I have not felt a buzz like that. Today, I was in the workplace I'm not in very often, I haven't been there for a couple of weeks, and they were saying, when's the strike likely to be? And then sort of I went off and they were saying, oh, what do we do on the day then? Shall we have a picket line here, or shall we go down the road, or shall we go into Bolton? And what should we put on our placards? And are we allowed to bring our kids? And there was these sort of debates and discussions going on with not a single union steward there. I was trying to do some work. And I think you hear these sort of things going on at the moment. And I think it's that buzz about there is something you can do about it. You don't have to just sit and take it. The crap that is coming at you, we have an opportunity to do something that people feel much more confident can actually win and can make a difference. I mean, I do think we have to be cautious about where the trade union leaders are going to take that action. Brendan Barber, I understand, was talking to the government, suggesting that if only they increased the negotiations a little bit and gave a little bit in the negotiations, maybe we'd be able to call it off. And I think we have to be very clear at the meetings that we're in that the aim of the strike is that I don't have to work a day longer, I don't have to pay a penny more, and when I get my pension, I get a pension that I can afford to live on, not one that leaves me in poverty for the rest of my working life. And I think that's very popular. That's very popular when you say it. And people understand it's not just about me and the rest of the health workers and our future. It's also about what sort of health service. One of the jokes that somebody made at one of the first meetings that I did at work was that what sort of health service will it be where when someone says to me, how do I use my Zimmer frame, you say, well, I'll show you by showing you how I use mine. And that's the sort of health service you can end up with, where we're too old to actually provide the proper health care that we're supposed to have. I suppose I want to end, because I haven't got very long, in terms of what you can do. Because I think there's a sense in which it's all happened so quickly, lots of us never thought the unions were ever going to get round to it, and then when they got round to it, it's like...
All of that gets an echo in what's happening at Wall Street at the moment, and we are placing ourselves as part of it, as part of an upward curve. You know, it started with the students last year, hugely important, the student rebellion, which showed that it was possible to fight. Then the biggest trade union demonstration that had ever been in British history, perhaps since 1848. Then the 30th of June strikes, which got the idea that it was possible for workers to fight together in a coordinated way, striking together, the education workers, the civil service workers, coming out together, 750,000 of them, opening the gates towards the potential of the 30th of November. And also other events, the fact that we had the demonstration in this city recently with 35,000 people on the streets, many of them from the northwest of England, showed that already the 30th of November is beginning to filter through to people and making them want to go on the streets and feel confident, because the good thing about that demonstration, not just the numbers, not just the working class component, but at the end of it, it's not just someone saying, and comrades, we need to go and fight the Tories. We are going to fight the Tories. There's a chance to have a public sector general strike on the 30th of November, and it can change the whole way that we feel about politics in Britain. Now, what a refreshing change that is, compared to the pallid response of Ed Miliband and the leaders of the Labour Party, who are letting the Tories get away with murder, absolute murder. You'll have seen the vote went through the House of Lords today for the privatisation of the health service. How did they get away with that bill, which will essentially privatise large sections of the National Health Service without a single major demonstration called by the Labour Party or by the leaders of the trade union movement? It's a disgrace that there wasn't a demonstration of hundreds of thousands against that bill. It's a disgrace that there wasn't a proper attempt to get industrial action against that bill. And it's because the response from the Labour Party and too many of the trade union leaders has been it's impossible really to fight. And all we can put forward is to say that the cuts need to be a little bit less, a little bit slower. Well, that's no alternative at all. It doesn't even work in its own terms. I was unfortunate enough to go to a school run by the Salesian Brothers, a Catholic order of monks and priests. We had a particularly sadistic maths teacher called Father Russell, a man I remember to this day, who used to offer you the choice. You could either have 10 strokes with the ruler now, or 3 for the next 3 days. Slower and a little bit less. Most people took the 10. Get it over with was what most people. There's no alternative to say you can have it a bit slower or a bit less harsh. That's not a response that's going to work in the future. So what we're seeing is the emergence of real resistance rather than fake resistance, and it's incredibly important. I want to talk about what really we can learn from Karl Marx about what's happening at the moment, because what's happening is very important in itself, but there's something much bigger happening here, which is this, the biggest capitalist crisis since the 1930s, or if you listen to the governor of the Bank of England, the biggest crisis ever, in fact, bigger than the 1930s. So we're in a serious moment. And let's be clear, it's not just a continuation of what's happened since 2008 with the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Actually, we're on the edge of another precipice. If Greek defaults, and everyone now thinks Greece will default, you know, everyone's preparing for this now. I heard Vince Cable, the business secretary, one of those Lib Dem turncoats, on the radio on Sunday saying, oh, of course Greece will default. I don't know whether it's actually the policy of the British government this will happen. I don't know what it did to the markets, but nonetheless, everybody's preparing for this. All the bankers are preparing for Greece to default. And that means that probably Italy will come under huge pressure and Spain will come under huge pressure. And what they will do is they will transfer another huge dollop of money from us to the bankers to try and keep the system running. And what will then happen is that all of us will have to pay for it. That's the plan. That's the plan. You see, capitalism can get out of any crisis as long as the working class are prepared to pay for it. That's one of the things Marx makes clear in his writing. Capitalism doesn't just collapse. Capitalism goes through crises, but it doesn't just fall apart. See, the crucial thing about Marx's analysis of crisis, he shows it's not something from outside the system, it's something intrinsic to the system itself. The final barrier to capitalist production is capital itself, as Marx said. Why? Because capitalism depends upon making profit from living labour, from workers, from the fact that they work a certain amount of time, they produce a certain number of goods, and you pay them less than the value of the goods that they produce. This is where profit comes from working people. But over time, as capitalism grows, more and more money is spent on technology, on machinery, and less is spent on the workers themselves as a percentage of the money that's laid out, and therefore the rate of profit, the amount of profit you make compared to the amount of money you invest in order to make that profit, begins to fall. Lots of tendencies that run against it, but this is what Marx understood, that this is what happens inside capitalism as it grows bigger, as it grows more developed. And therefore, crisis is built into the way capitalism works. It's not just, oh, if we changed a little bit here and there, capitalism would work perfectly. It can't do. It constantly goes into crisis, and then to get out of that crisis, it destroys vast amounts of capital by recession, by war, by taking over other companies at cheap rates and so on. This is the situation. That's why there was a great crisis in the 1880s, great crisis in the 1930s, the crisis in the 1970s, and why there's one again now. Now, more recently, they staved the crisis off for a while. They threw large amounts of money at it to shore up companies which otherwise would have gone bankrupt. That avoided the crisis for a while, but at the cost of not going through this cleansing mechanism of creative destruction by which capital revives itself again. Now the companies are so big, they are, in the jargon, too big to fail. If they go under, they pull the whole system down with them, and therefore the mechanisms by which capitalism enables itself to get out of the crisis are partially blocked, and that's why the crisis is so intractable. They don't have any answers. I read the Financial Times every morning, and the angst about the system is something sick about what's going on. What's the answer? We don't really know. We don't really know what the answer is, except you lot have got to pay for it. Cuts, cuts, cuts. That's what they're talking about. I think there was a survey done by the Institute of Fiscal Studies recently, a couple of days ago, which showed that workers' living standards will fall 7% on average in Britain by 2014. Tories got very angry about it. I got very angry about it. It's much too small a reality of how workers' living standards will fall by 2014. If you're a public sector worker on a 2-year pay freeze and inflation's running at 5% or more, and your fuel bill will be going up 8% and your food bill will be going up 9.5%, you're not 7% down in your living standards. You're 10 or 12 or 15% down on your living standards in 2 years' time. Plus the attacks on the pensions, plus the fact that you'll work till you're 68, plus the fact that your pension will then only go up by the lower rate of inflation rather than the higher rate of inflation, all adds up to a reduction of 15 or 20% in people's living standards. This is the sort of measure that was used by the International Monetary Fund against the Global South in the era of structural adjustment. The vicious assault upon many black and brown people in Africa and Asia, South America, to crush that part of the world in the interest of the bankers in the 1970s and the 1980s. That's the reality of what was done then, and now it's being done to workers across Europe. If we're prepared to pay the price, their system can revive itself. But we're not going to pay the price for that. Instead, we're going to fight about it. And all forms of resistance are important about it. It's very important that we go on the streets. It's very important that we have the student demonstration, national student demonstration on the 9th of November. It's very important that this Saturday we'll be taking part as the party is part of the Occupy the London Stock Exchange demonstration. Let's see how far we get. But nonetheless, we'll be taking part in the demonstration on Saturday. I've got a good solicitor. But we'll see how that goes. It's very important that we do that. The Block the Bridge thing that was in London recently over the health service, very important initiative to try and take place in this. But the second crucial thing that Marx talked about was the special role of the working class. Why do we go on about the 30th of November? The 30th of November is not just one amongst a series of other forms of resistance. It matters more. I'll put it clearly. It matters more than a demonstration. It matters more than simply a form of lobbying or meetings or something like that. It matters much more than that. Why? What Marx showed was the working class has power. Not because it's the biggest class necessarily. Not necessarily. When Marx existed, the working class hardly existed. When Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, the working class hardly existed. It only really existed in places like this and the country we now call Belgium. That was about it on a global scale. Now, so how did Marx say, why were these people important? This small group of people. The peasantry was what? 90% of the population in Marx's day. Surely they were the people who had the power. And numbers are important. We are for a mass involvement of people. After all, Marx also said the emancipation of the working class is the act of the working class itself. It's not something that can be done by someone else. It can't be done by parliamentarians or terrorists or a group of clever people or a bunch of philanthropists. You have to do it yourself. You have to transform your society yourself. So why about the working class? Because they had power. Because they are at the centre of social production. When the working class stops, the source of profit is turned off. And therefore, unlike the peasant, who can dream of a bit more land, can dream of dividing up the landlord's estate, perhaps gaining a donkey, but can't really conceive of social liberation, the working class has social power at the centre of it and has to act collectively. If we're going up, we're all going up together. If we go down, we all go down together. We're not going to divide up the factory. We're not going to divide up the office. We're not going to divide up the call centre. We have to take it over and run it in the interest of everybody. And the working class is therefore a powerful class, and it's a collective class. That's what makes one of the crucial insights about Marx. And that's why the 30th of November matters so much. It's about our class using the most powerful weapon in its arsenal to be able to fight back. The third thing that Marx pointed to was the need for revolution. Small reforms are not enough. Capitalism means poverty and war. That's the reality of what it means. It will constantly produce crisis. And when the crisis happens, the ruling class will turn to division. They will stoke up racism. You can feel it now. Cameron turning on people shopping illegal. That was his phrase. Well, it's not something different from the idea that we have to pay for the crisis. They know there'll be resistance, so they try and divide us. That's what capitalism means. More racism. It means more Islamophobia. It means more attempts to witch hunt people and to strengthen the state. The sweeping away of democratic rights. The incredible sentences after the riots of people given 4 years for suggesting on Facebook that maybe there ought to be a riot in some godforsaken place. That all of this is linked to the crisis and their attempts to defeat us over it. That's the reality. That's what capitalism is. And therefore we need a revolution. We need a revolution whereby we don't simply try and take over the existing state and use the same methods of parliamentary democracy where you get to vote once every few years for your MP, and he or she then goes off and does what they want and soaks themselves in expenses and you can't have any accountability over them. And anyway, you don't vote on any of the important things. You don't vote on how the economic levers of society are moved. You don't vote on what's produced or how it's produced or to whom it's distributed. None of that's open to democracy. Instead, that's the whole secret realm. No admittance except on business. And that secret realm is where real power lies. And therefore, if we're going to really tear up society and replace it with a decent society, we have to have a different sort of movement. One that is built mainly on the streets and particularly in the workplaces where we're strong, in every community, in every working class area, in every office and call centre and factory. That's where it has to be built, and it can't be about just winning parliamentary elections. It has to be out of a movement which sets as its goal the attempt to create a different form of democracy, a more direct democracy, where people decide about everything in that society, about how we match together the needs of society and the resources of society, without the intervening question of profit. Here we are in this incredibly wealthy world, and yet even when capitalism was booming, 30,000 people under the age of 5 died every day from malnutrition and easily treatable diseases. When capitalism was booming, now it's much worse. Now it's much worse in the global south. Now that hunger is beginning to reappear in the United States and Britain, that people are handing out food parcels in working class communities. One of these schemes that was set up, I was reading yesterday, that was set up to recycle because of the fear of waste, to take food that the supermarkets have thrown away and give it to people. And they did it purely on an ecological basis. Now says they're doing it simply because people don't have enough food to sustain themselves. And in a place like Leicester, they're handing out 98 tonnes of food a year in that single city from that one charity because of the scale of the effects that people are facing, and particularly young people. Seen the figures today, nearly 1 million young people now without a job. This is the reality of the blocked hope, the torn apart lives that young people are facing. It's a very serious situation, but our side can win. Because what Marx pointed out is that capitalism creates its own grave diggers. And we're the people who are the grave diggers. The workers and the poor have the power, if we use it, to fight back. And therefore, I want to finish with saying that we have to have an immediate aim and a longer term aim. The first immediate aim is to hurl ourselves behind every fight back that happens, but particularly the 30th of November, to make sure that this does have that punching effect against the other side, to begin to block them, but actually our aim should be higher. We have to bring this government down. Not enough to simply try and change. Not enough simply to change one or two policies. I mean, they're going to keep doing this. They privatise the post office, they privatise areas of the NHS, they're going to keep cutting our wages, they're going to keep destroying jobs. They're a weak government, but they're still getting away with these things, so they've got to go. That's the only way in the end that we're going to be successful about it, and there's important things to do. The reality is, some of the trade union leaders are prepared to fight. Prepared to fight, even unusual people. The leader of UNISON, Dave Prentice, that Karen mentioned, a man who spent a long time over the last few years witch-hunting people like us, is now encouraging people like us, because he has problems with his own right wing and his union, and he's prepared to fight to get the ballot won. Good, we want the ballot won, we'll be with him when he's doing that. But let's be clear, you can't trust any of these people to carry through the struggle afterwards. And that's why this convention, this Unite the Resistance Convention, which I hope everyone will sign up to tonight, is very important. Because we have an organisation of revolutionary socialists, a few thousand strong. We're very important in this process. I think we've done a good job in shaping the resistance. We were important in the student events. We were important in the strikes on the 30th of June. And we've done our bit, and we'll do our bit to build the 30th of November. We'll do as much as possible. But actually, the 30th of November is 3 million people. You can't really orientate and shape a movement of 3 million with just a few thousand people. You have to also have an influence on much larger numbers of people around you. And therefore, the idea of this convention is to bring together those elements of the trade union leaderships who are prepared to fight, but also of rank and file workers, because there will be a question the day after the 30th of November, and now what next? And it won't be enough if it's, well, the next thing really is the council elections in May when we can all vote Labour. No, we have to have more action, and we have to have continuous action. This is the key question. You see, even in Greece, a much higher level of struggle, they haven't beaten the other side. The key question is whether there is continuous action. If in Greece, the power workers who stayed out for a week continuously had stayed out for a month, they would have beaten the other side. In 1995 in France, the rail workers stayed out and they beat the other side. Now we have to create a movement which is strong enough to have all those arguments with groups of workers about what comes next. Not these smart strikes that are talked about, not a small section here, or the northwest one day and the southeast next day, or surnames A to D one day and F to J another day. That's not going to beat the other side. They're much too ruthless, much at stake here. This is the whole question of whether they are able to revive their system or not. So it's much too big a question for that. We have to create a movement which can have that effect. That's what this convention is about, and it's why it's really important that people sign up for it tonight. Whether you're a student, whether you're a worker, whether you're unemployed, whether you're a trade unionist, whether you're in an unorganised workplace, sign up for this as an important development. And finally, at the centre of all of these different fights, we need many more socialists. We need many more people who make the connections between the struggle against homophobia, against racism, against the Islamophobia, against the English Defence League, with the fight against jobs, and with the working class at the centre of it, and an idea of a different vision of society. What's the alternative? How can we change it? Where does power really lie? You have to have people who answer those questions. You have to have people who are leaders in their workplaces, not people who wag their fingers at others, but people who explain and argue and discuss and debate and pull people behind them. We need many more socialists who play that role. We're going to need more of them before the 30th of November, and we'll need them in the bigger struggles that will come. This is just scratching the surface. It's very, very important, but much bigger struggles are to come. When that happens, we need more people who understand that it's a class battle we're in, who understand that it's a fight for our lives, who understand that we need a different sort of world. That's why we need more people in the Socialist Workers Party. We need to fight to get the 30th of November as strong as possible. We need that Unite the Resistance Convention to be big and to have an effect on shaping the struggle before it and the struggles after the 30th of November. And we need more people who are going to fight for a socialist future. Thank you.
For about 20 to 30 minutes. I'd like you to come to the front if you will, and put up your hand if you'd like to speak.
Biscuits?
Any questions, anecdotes, your personal experience, or if you just want to argue something, that's fine.
Well, I keep thinking, we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about bankers. Is it really important the fact that the banks are privately owned? And this is never mentioned or protested about. I've been to a few meetings now and we've never spoken about this. The fact that the banks are privately owned, I mean, it seems like a huge issue. I mean, nothing can really. Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, that's what
It helps it. It's every industry, it's the whole of society is divided into private property and held against us. We produce it, but it falls out of our control. That's the heart of what is capitalism about. Now, Charlie talked about the significance of the 30th of November strikes, and I think there's something to be added to what Charlie said. You see, we will actively support and have a great day on the day of the 30th. And then there'll be afterwards. And people will say, what next? And we want to argue for all-out strikes. And we want to argue, as Charlie said, for bringing down the government. And even then, if we brought down the government, we'd still have to say, it's not enough. It's not enough, because after all, what's the alternative in the present arrangements to bringing down the government? It's a Labour government. It's a Labour government led by a man who said to the TUC conference, you're absolutely wrong to go on strike. There's never been a leader of the Labour Party in the entire history of that body, over 100 years, that has ever supported a strike. Not what, I mean, I'll keep asking, can somebody name a Labour leader who supported a strike when he was leading the Labour Party? And there isn't one that I can think of, that anybody can think of. Because fundamentally, the Labour Party's view of what politics is about is that the great majority of the people should remain passive. And once every 5 years, they should go and exercise 2 seconds of freedom by putting a cross on a piece of paper and voting for the Labour Party to miss government. And that's the alternative offer. I think the reason why November the 30th matters is because what it will do to people's feelings about themselves and their workmates and about their sense of their own power. Because the society that we want to see is a society in which ordinary people take control of their own society, abolish private property, take property into their own hands, and actually, to do that, they have to change. Marx had this lovely expression, he said, you need a revolution for 2 reasons. One is the ruling class can't be got rid of in any other way. The more important reason, he said, there's no other way that ordinary people can get rid of what he called the crap of ages. And what he meant by the crap of ages was all those habits of subordination and feeling powerless and so on that everybody feels. You sit and you watch television in the last week and you think, you get incredibly angry. You see that unemployment is now 2.75 million. You see the horror of the tanks in the military vehicles in Egypt driving over the bodies of Coptic Christians in Tahrir Square. And you see, on the other hand, fantastic joy. You see flashes on the news of the Occupy Wall Street protesters and their brilliant slogans and the rest of it. You see, you go from anger and horror to joy and pleasure, but most of the time it's anger and horror. That's the truth. And we want more joy. And it isn't just us that needs more joy, everybody needs more joy. And the real joy that comes to people is when they start to feel powerful. And that's why November the 30th is important, because it's precisely about people beginning to stretch their muscles and beginning to feel that collectively they can act, and that's how we change the world.
Just a couple of points. When people do take charge of society, and there are examples of this, we see how things can be operated. We see people taking over their own transport systems, the hospitals, the schools, and so on and so forth. We saw this, or we didn't see it, but it was witnessed in Russia in 1917, where for a while after the first revolution in the March or February of 1917, there was a displacement of the Tsar, and we ended up with a parliamentary sort of government under Kerensky, and the Bolsheviks, which were the socialists, running a parallel government. It's a situation of dual power. The Bolsheviks organised themselves. The Bolshevik Party, or the Soviets, which is workers' councils, were democratic. It was the way that people organised the distribution of what's needed for everybody in society. So we've seen these examples of people taking over, running the railways, running the buses, running the hospitals, the schools, the universities, and so on and so forth, democratically for themselves, whereby they elect somebody who will represent them in a council. And those councils can come together, as it did in Russia, and unite together to discuss how we take society forward. So there have been examples of how society can be run. Unfortunately, they've all been destroyed because the revolutionary situations that may arise, if they're isolated in one country, they can be slaughtered and isolated by the rest of the world, which wants to keep capitalism solid and so on. Another example is Spain in 1936, where we saw in Barcelona, that when people took to the streets, and in George Orwell's book, Homage to Catalonia, he described how it looked when you saw people in the saddle, where people take over democratically running their own society. That's what we're aiming for, is the collapse, when capitalism does collapse, when we can rise up and move forward and actually run society democratically in a way in which we've seen examples of, unfortunately, examples that have been destroyed by people like Franco and the hostility of the rest of the capitalist world against that. We live in a world now where the working class is not like it was in Marx's time, but the working class is global, and we're seeing what's happening across the globe now, and the prospects for me I think are very, very promising. But we need to have that organisation to make sure that we direct the revolutionary movement in the direction that will win.
Union branch quite some months ago now for a general strike, and we didn't come out of nowhere. We formed an activist group quite some time ago, and even in the district pushed it, and it was good, it was excellent. We got people together who did feel pissed off. Our union branch wasn't a left-wing union branch, it was a union branch that held people back, and people wanted to do something. We basically got people together, started doing things. We put our motion through, and we were all pleased with the motion. It was great, general strike, but we didn't really, to be honest with you, hand on heart there, really believe in it. We could see the logic of the argument. We bloody believe in it now, I can tell you. Because not only have we sort of been transforming ourselves over the recent months, actually, people I work with have been transforming themselves. And when Karen says about the Tories getting it wrong, the Tories look at us and they've got nothing but contempt for working people. They look at working people and they just see we're rubbish. They just see that, they don't fight, they don't do anything. They don't see that we go through periods of change as well. And actually, when we're in my workplace, it's a pretty good density of working, unionised. It's quite good. I've got my section, about 60 people, I've got 3 people like in union. 3 of them I tried for years to try and get them to join, wouldn't join. I almost fell off my chair the other day when this woman comes in and says, "Can I have one of those forms to join the union?" And I was almost speechless. I can't tell you how many times, I tried to get in. She's just... Anyway, times are a-changing. They very much are a-changing. And there is a real mood for struggle. The difference is we need to actually push that mood forward. So it's very important, not just we get the vote out, and we have to do everything we can to do that, but also we actually get people involved. People want to get involved. It's not about 1 or 2 people going over in the picket. In Salford, we're going to have a demonstration. Our branch now is going to push for a march. We're going to come into town and join the main march up. We've got to get more people involved because people want to do something. And in doing something, they become conscious of their own powers. Just as I'm a fairly old fella, dormant, sat around doing nothing for a while. Someone comes up to my door and says, "Look, Steve, times are changing, you need to do something." I get involved and suddenly I begin to skip a bit more. I feel I've got a bit more spirit in me. Other people are exactly the same. We need to reach out to those people, get them involved, and we then do have the capacity to begin to talk about real change and wipe that smile off Dave Cameron's face.
I'm going to start this contribution a bit oddly, because I was watching the Marx lectures last night. I don't know if anybody's seen them. And there's a really funny bit where Marx is in Hyde Park in London feeding the ducks with Jenny Marx in a really normal situation. And I think for most people, most of the time, that's how you feel. These revolutions happening in Egypt. There are thousands of people out in Wall Street. There are occupations in Spain. There's one of the most profound economic crises, the most profound crisis I think pretty much everyone in the room has lived through. But by and large, day to day, you can feel like you get up, you go to work, and things carry on as normal. So that idea that it is possible for people to come together and even just to try to fight the government and just to try to resist the cuts can seem to be something sometimes that is very distant. And that's why, I mean, lots of people have spoken about it, but it's really exciting to be a socialist at the moment, and it's really exciting to be involved in the struggle. I was at the construction workers protest this morning, ridiculously early at 6 o'clock outside a paper mill in Carrington, but there were 60 electricians attempting to stop people from going into work on the factory over the attack on their pay and conditions. The universities in Manchester last week, 85,000 people marching. You're beginning to see and feel the stirrings of things, and that's why I think these sorts of meetings are really important, because it's not enough just to have the kind of sense of things, the surface appearance, Marx would have said, of bits of struggle. The bit that I think makes me feel smug sometimes to be a Marxist is the understanding of where the economic crisis has come from, what the fault lines are, and the potential that that gives for real radical change. So meetings like that, people should ask small questions if you've got them. If you just want to put your hand up and just ask a small question. We're going through one of the most important times in our lives. This is quite literally the fight of our lives in some ways, and if we're going to win that fight, we need to have clarity. So if you do have a small question, you don't believe the revolution is possible, whatever, please ask it, and then we can have a bit of a discussion around it.
Just a couple of things. I think part of the whole narrative about the crisis is they try and make it quite complicated. And I think at the moment there are 4 quite simple truths that should be a guide to people. One is that capitalism is in a massive crisis. There's a financial crisis, there's an ecological crisis. It is literally a system that at the moment is struggling to find a way out from its own contradictions. And because of that, even though Lehman Brothers collapse was 3 years ago now, longer than I've been in my workplace, they still haven't been able to get out of that sort of crisis of capitalism. The second thing is that the way that they're proposing as a solution to try and sort of float along for the next few years is by ripping those reforms off us that we, as a class, have won in the past. So today, they ripped up the NHS, which has been the biggest reform, the most popular reform that has united working class people in this country for 60 years. How many people look back to sort of the post-war settlement in 1945 and we don't need a revolution because we've got a great health service, we've got great education. Actually, all that sort of stuff is being ripped up from us now. And so that's the second truth, that you can't just rely on reforms. Reforms come and go, depending on the balance of class forces. They're not something that we have control over. They are concessions that we win temporarily from the system that we're always forced to defend. The third truth is, with the 30th of November coming up, look at the power that can stop those things happening. Look at the power that can stop them making us pay for the crisis, that can stop them ripping up our welfare state. We've had the student protests, and I'm an education worker, so I was on those protests. They were fantastic. We had the 26th of March, and you could sense that power there. But actually, on the 12th of November, after Millbank, and on the 27th of March, we still had a government. If we go out on an indefinite general strike, there isn't going to be a government anymore. They simply can't rule a country that isn't working. And it's that power that we need to challenge the government with. And so, but the fourth truth about it is that doesn't happen automatically. It didn't happen that Lehman Brothers collapsed and capitalism went into crisis and suddenly everybody thought, this is our chance, let's take the system down forever and let's make a better world. Actually, it's taken 3 years of the class learning and of socialists arguing to get us to the point where on the 30th of November we're going to have a one-day public sector general strike. And that is just the beginning. So anybody who thought the last 3 years was hard work, sorry, but there's more to come. Actually, that's just the beginning, because we've got to go back on the 1st of December and argue about going out indefinitely, about extending the action, about this not just being about public sector workers, and not just being about public sector pensions, but being about them attacking us as a class, and us attacking them as a class, and saying that we're not going to pay for the crisis. And that requires not just the spontaneity of working class struggle, that sort of drive to strike action, what people have described in their workplace at the moment, the sort of kick that people have, the spring in their step around the 30th of November. Actually, it takes organised socialists who can argue through in their workplace, argue through in their colleges, argue through in their campuses, learn from the tactics of the past, apply those lessons to now, discuss with the class the next stage forward, so that we're not just waiting for Brendan Barber and the General Council of the TUC to say, don't worry, we'll only take a little bit out of your pensions, that'll just mean you're a little bit in poverty when you retire, but we're still going to sell off the NHS, or whatever crazy deal they come up with, but actually can stop the government now and put on the agenda a different world where in 60 years' time my grandkids aren't fighting over the reforms that we might win in the next period. Actually, they're living in a world where we plan, us who make society, us who make the wealth, where we plan what happens to it. We live in a democratic society where we don't have bosses telling us what to do, and there aren't crises like this, so we can solve climate change. Because that is what the 30th of November is about. That is what being an organised socialist about. That's why tonight you should join. That's why you should be out on the picket lines on the 30th of November with everybody you know. Literally nobody, that you don't know shouldn't be out on the picket lines and out on the demos on the 30th of November. And that takes becoming an organised socialist tonight.
I want to give an example of the kind of muck of ages that Colin was talking about, because it drives me mad. The things that we're expected to take for granted as being normal, that are just completely insane. I mean, they justify the cuts, saying we haven't got enough money, and yet, Charlie's gone through it's work that creates wealth. And you've got millions of people who are not allowed to work. We've got the law. If people broke into factories that have been shut down, they'd have the police arresting them and locking them up for committing a crime. So you could have people jailed for stealing a bottle of water. If people went into one of the factories where they bottle the water, they'd be jailed for doing that as well. And you've got this whole just madness, really, of capitalism, isn't it? Where you've got this set of rules that there's no logic to it at all. No logic to it at all. It's just about the people at the top getting richer. And I do think that when people fight back, you have that possibility of people seeing a chance of doing something different. Even organising a demonstration, people get a feeling of having their own power. But a strike on the scale that we're looking at on the 30th, I think can really change the mood completely. I work in the private sector, and I think one of the arguments the government's trying to do is just divide and rule, isn't it? It's trying to make people who are not in the public sector think, that they're getting pensions, they're better off than us, and all the rest of it, and as if we should be squabbling over the few crumbs that they allow ordinary people to have. And they must think we're absolutely stupid to fall for that, really. I mean, it's so obvious, isn't it, that the bankers and the cabinet is just full of millionaires, just looking after other millionaires like them, and they're hoping that they can divide and rule. And I think we've got a real job to do to try to counteract that divide and rule and make sure that's as united as possible. And certainly one of the things I've been arguing is, if there are 3 million or whatever it is out on the 30th of November, the idea that isn't going to change the mood for everybody, wherever you work, or whatever you do, it just seems to me ridiculous. Everybody's going to feel that there's a sense of ordinary people having power, and that wherever you are, you've got a bit more chance of not having to put up with it. And that's why I think, wherever whether you're a benefit claimant, a student, a pensioner, private sector worker, public sector worker, 30th of November, that's our day.
It was Marie Antoinette, when the French started to rebel, she said, let them eat cake. And David Cameron at the conference basically said, let them eat shit. Because that's all he's offered us. She was more progressive. That seems to be what they're offering in Greece, in America, Portugal, and around the world. They offer us nothing. They're just taking everything away. In America, the Republicans are arguing that we should abolish the minimum wage because it stops employers employing people at rock bottom wages. It'll be the sort of thing they're arguing over here. Because what they're doing around the world is they're competing about cutting wages and conditions for ordinary people to increase their profits. You know? And it's a terrible, terrible thing. They don't really care how you live. They don't care if you live. All they care about is the amount of level of profits they're going to make from you at work. That's the whole criteria. I believe we're in an exciting time right now. People are having meetings like this all throughout the world. Ordinary people. I mean, there's no millionaires in this meeting. I assume this. It's ordinary working class people coming together because they're just unhappy. And people are getting excited about the sense of change. A sense that we can do something as opposed to sitting home and saying we can't do anything, it's just getting worse day after day. So that's what's so exciting. And November the 30th, it's not only going to be looked at in this country, it's going to be looked at just like we're looking at what's happening on Wall Street, what's happening in Greece. It's going to be looked at throughout the world. We want to make that a real day, a festival against this government. And not only the public sector workers, not only other workers, but families and everybody else. Wherever you get out, people out on strike, on demonstrations, we want to be out. We want Britain to be the center of resistance on November the 30th. Everybody out.
Lots of people have talked about how amazing is what's happening around the world and that we're part of a global struggle. Our class is fighting, and we're fighting at different stages and at different levels of intensity. I mean, Charlie talked about that, but and we are doing that. You know, here we're talking about going out on strike in November for the first time, having a real public sector general strike. And in Greece, they've already had so many of these. But if you look at the Middle East, and their level of struggle intensity is so much more different. And what can we do, apart from learning about what they've gone through, being inspired by the struggles around the world? There's some practical stuff we can do. We can offer solidarity. So on Thursday morning, there is a seminar for business people. So the Manchester Commerce is having a meeting with the Bahraini business community to celebrate their side, to really build up their side, because they're actually arguing that actually Bahrain is open for business, that actually they haven't got atrocities going on there, that people aren't dying on the streets fighting for a revolution or for democracy. And we have to stand with our side in Bahrain, and we can do that by being outside Bridgewater Hall on Thursday, 9 o'clock, because we have to say, actually, it's not business as usual. We will not stand by while you attack our side over there. So I want to just put a call to people, come to the demonstration. It's at 9 till 10 o'clock at the start of the seminar, and actually say, we know what you're doing to our side there. We know that you're attacking nurses and other medical workers. We're actually standing by and treating the people that are being attacked in these demonstrations there. So I just want to put a call out. That's Bridgewater Hall, Thursday morning, 9 o'clock.
Right. I'm really excited about what's going on right now, as everyone is, because I get the feeling that everything's bubbling, beneath the surface, and people start to wake up a bit more. I'm really excited about I'm all about bringing down capitalism and all that, but I'm really concerned about something else now that I feel like is not being addressed. Like, the reason I'm aware of this, the reason why I'm even bothered about this, is because what I've learned, what I've taught myself, not what I learned in school. Right? And what I'm starting to realise is that what people learn in school, and also the health system, is actually really crap, and it's actually got nothing to do with money. It's got to do with ignorance. It's got to do with ignorance. And we can, protesting against capitalism and against the government is only one side of things. But every day that we're doing this, every year that we're doing this, another child is going through this crap education system, learn a really one-sided view of the world, a really Eurocentric view, and learn about capitalism. I realised today why we learned about Egypt. Egypt's it was where hierarchy, unless it was summer, I don't know, but we learn about places that have hierarchy. We're subconsciously taught that hierarchy is the way to go, and people knew more. And also, people can't extend their empathy to people from other countries because they know very little about people from other countries and the history of other countries and the contributions that other countries have made. Because of this, it's like a psychological thing. People don't... I just feel like reform can't change anything on its own, but reform can't be neglected for revolution. We can't all be revolutionising while our children aren't being properly educated and our healthcare system isn't moving forward. We've got one of the worst healthcare systems. It's not even about money. It's about ignorance and education. I feel like this needs to be spoken about way more, and I feel like this needs to be protested about way more. I mean, very specifically, I want to get Black history changed. I don't want Black history to be, yous were crap. We took yous, right? We domed you for a little bit. Oh, but now we set you free. That's what Black history is. We learn about slavery, and we learn about how we got released. Oh, thank you. You know what I mean? That's not Black history. And it goes to so many other countries and civilizations and advanced knowledge that other people have had that we don't explore. It's so important, and it's being neglected. Yeah, that's, yeah.
I think it was you first, and you as well. And I think you for a little bit. You talked about banks and how you have these crises of capitalism. I think we have to really see how capitalism has come about. It's been the separation of ownership and responsibility. So you have people with huge amounts of wealth. You know, say 1 million years ago, we humans used to live in tribes, and used to have small tribes, and you know, if your chief did something to annoy you, you could kill him. Today, if the head of Goldman Sachs causes the biggest recession in the history of the world, what can we do? We can go to Wall Street, all 10,000 of us, stand around, get rained on, and get insulted. Is this the kind of world we want to live in? We have the power to change it. The only downside to this power is that most of us think we buy into this corporate view that we don't have the power. We do have the power. We can simply walk up to Parliament and say this has to stop. If 50 million Britons, if 10 million, if 5 million Britons walk up to Parliament, and that's only, how many, 1 of 20? Walk up to Parliament and say, we want a fair electoral system. We want to elect our leaders properly, rather than have, say, first past the post. If 5 million people do that, do we think that it won't pass? Come on, do we think that it won't pass? So why don't we do it?
It's true, isn't it, that, and there's lots of frustration that when you come across what's happening at the moment, all sorts of ideas begin to be challenged, and you challenge it in terms of, you know, how you see education and the information that we're not given. And that's true, isn't it, that the ideas in society are the prominent ideas in society, are the ideas of the ruling class. It is no surprise in our schools that we're not taught actually how black people actually did fight their own racism. It wasn't the white people coming to the rescue, that we're not taught about how we actually got our rights, and that actually work people said, oh, you know, we're really lucky to have these conditions and that we work the working days that we do. It's not true, is it? That actually it's working people who have fought for decent working levels, actually fought for a decent working day. And you know, all the reform acts that came on was actually on the back of real resistance and class movements. We're not taught that in school. You're absolutely right, we're not taught it. And that's partly why I learned that when I joined a political organisation. I actually begin to understand it's those shackles that come tumbling down when you begin to sort of see society and it exposes itself in its real form. Actually, it can be really exciting because you actually begin to see, actually we did it and we can continue to do it and we can make a huge difference. And I think that what I wanted to sort of come back a little bit to as well is that I'm a local government worker, and you know, and I was actually walking around in my office and one of my senior managers said to me, oh Marion, you're singing. I didn't realise I was singing. I've had such a good, you know, because I'm in such a good mood, I have to say. I've had such a happy 2 weeks. And it's because you begin to see that you can begin to reap back control. That, you know, I've been a local government worker for 26 years, and I can trust you that for 26 years I have not been singing a lot in my office. But actually, when you begin to see you can make a difference, and when you can begin to see you can need to fight back, I agree with, you know, the contribution people saying you've seen the misery, but actually at the moment I can see the beginnings of what we can do and how we can actually fight it. And, you know, and we had very large pensions meeting in my building. And I work in a building of about 1,000 workers, and I'm I'm sort of been helping in trying to get people to leaflet and go around and to take up some of the discussions and arguments around pensions. And it's really interesting, really interesting. I've had some fantastic discussions. I agree with everyone that, and you're coming at people coming with very, very honest, can we actually do anything? I don't think we can do anything. Yes, I think we can do something. Why do I need to be in a union? What is a union? What will it do? What's my role in that union? Why aren't the union really leading this? What's happening? In the meeting, I think I'm going to make it as short as I can, but the main thing is the cautiousness of the bureaucracy in terms of what they're saying. So in the meeting that we had in my building, the branch officer said, we really need to get a really big yes vote. We need to get as many people out because we want to get them back to the negotiating table. And you're like, and people are in the room and they're like listening. And actually, I came back and said, we're going to face a general strike. This, the cabinet has got, and then I said, I can't remember how many millionaires are on the Tory cabinet committee, and someone shouted out 19. Actually, it doesn't take a huge amount to actually politicise the meeting. And when I pointed out that 98% of directors of private industry have got a pension of 175,000, that MPs only have to work for 10 years to get a pension of 25,000. It took me nearly 25 years of my working life to even earn 25,000. Actually you begin to see the class divide in that. And when we actually began to raise that in the meeting, actually it begins to sort of push some of the cautiousness of the trade union bureaucracy in the room. And I'm really, obviously I am, but I'm really excited about the possibility and the potential to actually do that.
If I limit you to 1 minute and tap on the table, I'm not sure if we'll be able to fit everyone in, but we'll try. Okay.
Yeah, in a nutshell, we have to explain things in a straightforward and simple manner to our audience, using exactly those arguments that Marion made about the directors having gold-plated pensions. We need to explain simply in a nutshell what happened with Lehman Brothers, how the crisis actually started. Because I should imagine that most of us here aren't quite aware of how this Lehman Brothers, these toxic debts that we're buying from these duff mortgages in America, why should it affect us, etc. This has to be explained simply and in a nutshell and straight to the point, as with the points what Marion just made about top company directors, MPs, etc. and gold-plated pensions. It's not being explained clearly enough, isn't it? I don't think. But you found that when you said it simply like that, the support you got. And I find the same when I make these arguments in a simple manner. People listen. Straight to the point.
You've asked me to be brief, so I'll try. I just wanted to try and address a little bit the points that you were making, the points you were making here, because you all raised so many questions I can't answer them. But really, in a nutshell, I think what's been sort of raised here is what is the link between fighting for reforms and fighting for revolution? What is the link between defending what we've got and actually going forward and winning back the whole system and winning back what's ours? And a woman, Rosa Luxemburg, said that revolutionaries are the best reformists. The reason the best people who can fight for reforms, and the reason she said that is it's to do with the way we fight. All the concessions that we have, the welfare state that we have, the education system that we have, with all its imperfections, and it's not great, is it? But even the fact that we have state education, we have those things because workers fought for them and demanded for them, went on the streets for them, struck for them, rioted for them. They terrified the ruling class to get those. That's why the ruling class gave us those. They didn't sort of say, oh dear, we've been a bit horrible here. No, we fought for those things. We had to grab those things off them. So the point is that
I'm absolutely thrilled about the 30th of November, not because I'm going to be on strike on that day, I wish, but because I'm a union rep at the BBC. The BBC has announced massive sweeping cuts in our working conditions, a massive 2,000 job losses over the next 4 years. It's going to be my job to try to work, to argue that we have to fight against this, that we can fight and we can win. And when we struggle, that's when we learn. That's when we learn about our own power. All the sort of horrible servile feelings start to strip away. People come and support us. That's when we can discuss and debate. The sexism and the racism starts to break down, because actually we're all black, white, straight, gay. We're all together on a picket line fighting against our bosses, and so therefore fighting back is the best education there is.
This is my first meeting here, and I just have a little comment about consistency in the struggle, because I just came to Manchester just before I lived in Barcelona, so I was part of the movement that lost the Vignanos. I don't know how much British media covered. Anyway, in the beginning of the struggle there wasn't much cover in the Spanish media. But when the movement grew, La Vanguardia, which is one of the biggest papers in Barcelona, they had like their own little subheading, even for Los Indignados. So they had economy, politics, war politics, and Los Indignados, which was, okay, the coverage was very biased, so it wasn't very positive, but it was still coverage. And as soon as the movement slowed down, they took it away, like straight away. And there was no when it wasn't newsworthy anymore, they just took it away. So I just mean that as proof of the importance in, I don't know very much about the work of the Workers' Socialist Party yet, that's one thing. So, but just the importance of just continuing.
Yeah.
Charlie did mention it in his speech, but I just wanted to re-emphasise the importance of the National Convention coming up, the United Resistance Convention. This has to be the next step in the fight back for us, for organised socialists, for anti-cuts campaigners, for trade unionists. This has to be the next event that you book yourself onto. So, well, it's going to be a great day. It's in a big venue. There's space for 1,500 people, so we should fill that out. I think we need to send 100 people from Manchester to go there to debate about how we can build up that 30th of November, how we can have a brilliant day of vibrant protest, a general day of anger against the government and against the cuts, but also about fighting for a strategy that can win after the 30th of November. And not just about pensions either, not just about, we want to talk about the NHS cuts, the NHS privatisation. We want to talk about cuts to local youth services and gyms and stuff, like absolutely everything. We want to have a big discussion about how the working class movement goes forward and how it wins. So come and see me at the end and sign yourself up for this.
Partly I'm actually responding to what you said about education, because I really agree with the whole argument about how we're educated in schools. And I think actually partly what's exciting about the process we're going through at the moment is that people are having debates. So people come to meetings like this to have debates and ask questions and all those sorts of things, because people need to understand what's going on in the world around them. But I think when it comes to education, it's important for the capitalist class to be about how we are educated. It's important that we're not educated about our freedom and where it comes from, how black people liberated themselves. It's important that we don't understand that. And in fact, my education started when I joined the Socialist Workers Party, which was way after I left school. And that's when I actually started learning about all these things, and I have continued to do so ever since. But if you think about teachers themselves within education, also probably the vast majority of them feel very constricted about what they're able to teach. Lots and lots of teachers hate the way they have to teach, and they are constricted by things like the national curriculum, stats, and all the rest of it. Sorry, very, very briefly. So part of what is happening at the moment is people are fighting back against pensions, but teachers, for as an example, and this is true of health workers, will also be arguing about better ways of teaching, better things that are happening in education. And part of the process is, yes, we're fighting on pensions, but what you will also get in schools is teachers sitting around going, God, this is shit, we don't want to do SATs anymore, we don't want to teach the way we want to teach, how do we change education? And that is partly, I think, how you get reforms before we actually get to the point of revolution.
Sorry, I'm really sorry for people that didn't get to speak, but this is the last point.
Yeah, education. The problem with it is that it's not about education anymore. It's about training. Even at university, you used to go to university, get educated. Now it's about employability. Take out a loan. Is it an investment? Will you get a job that will pay back the loan afterwards? Health, we want to defend what we've got, but it's capitalism that makes people sick. If you're at work, they work you to death. And if you're not at work, you're ill because you're at home worrying. And Karen has to treat the casualties. Now, in 1981, in Poland, there was a massive strike wave. 10 million people out on strike. And something very strange happened. People in the mental health wards started to get better and discharge themselves. But a new group of people were coming in to the mental health wards who were having breakdowns. They were managers. They were bosses. Because the new challenge made them ill. Now, you mentioned, the brother mentioned about we should march in our millions. We've done it. But we didn't stop the war. Now, when we strike in our millions, it's a bigger punch, and they can't ignore it, especially if we do it once and then we're going to do it again, and hopefully we're going to stay out. Now, the last thing I wanted to say is, we've had a fantastic discussion, and a lot of people might agree with lots of things, but why join the Socialist Workers Party? You see, I would urge everyone to really consider it, because there's two sorts of forces going on that are going to shape all the struggles that are going to happen. On the one hand, there's people who are going to say, and are going to want it to be passive, for it to be bureaucratic, for it to be, let's not do too much. Then on the other hand, there's people like us who are going to say we want more action and we want to agitate. Because we're not just another sort of party like other parties, we're a combat organisation. At the moment, lots of people are realising there's a war going on, a class war. They're after destroying our class and everything that we've got that's any good. We've got to fight them. And if we're going to fight them and beat them, we've got to be serious and organised. We need a combat organisation that can come together, work out what to do, and to take it, the struggle forward and to say, this is the next step, this is what we should do. And that's what I think Charlie has outlined. But we meet in all parts of Manchester that we can, every week, and have a discussion about what to do. And the real education, I know Charlotte mentioned this, I've learnt more from being on strikes, from being on protests, and being in meetings and being in discussion than I ever learned when I was at school or at college. And I think some of the young people today that are in Occupy Wall Street, they're having these assemblies, they're discussing this and that, they're learning too in the struggle. And the real struggle is the best school. But you need a university, and the Socialist Workers Party is a university of struggle. I'd urge everyone to join.
Thank you everyone for their contributions. I thought today was a really, really good discussion. Lots of good points made. If you like what you've heard today, then we do have meetings weekly all across Manchester. So if you want information on that, come and speak to Jen in the corner. Don't forget to leave your email for up-and-coming events. Also, if you have agreed with what's been said today, like what everyone's been saying, then there's SWP forms over there, so go grab a load. And we'll conclude now with Karen speaking for 5 minutes and Charlie speaking for 10 minutes.
Right, thanks very much. I think it's been a really good discussion, and I think it reflects what's going on in the outside world. I think there is a huge shift taking place in thousands and thousands of workplaces right across the country. And I think that that is changing the way people feel about what they can do about work. And rather than just being miserable and grim and drinking more, people are actually thinking, join the club. then I think people are looking to actually, they can for the first time you get a glimpse and a sense of we can do something to change that. And that is causing a massive upsurge in people who are serious about wanting to talk about doing something about it. Just in Bolton at the hospital, which hasn't got a great tradition, we've had almost 400 people came to 4 meetings that we held over the course of one day, and we've had over 300 people come to the 9 meetings that we've now had in the community. And loads of those are people who've never been to a union meeting before, who've never talked about strike action before, but who are really enthused at the thought, not of themselves doing it, but about doing it with other people as part of a huge movement. That notion of being part of a public sector general strike has really made people have some hope that it is possible to do something about it. And I think we need to find those people. So we need to have the meetings, we need to give them the leaflets, we need to give them activity to do, and we need to find them because they're there. But I think the other thing we do is we do have to be political with them. That, you know, I mean, I raised the question of Bahrain because there are nurses and medics who have been jailed for 15 years for treating people who are on the wrong side of the battle. And I raised it, and it's always been really difficult for me to raise political things on the staff side because we've got the Royal College of Nursing and lots of people who say, I don't think we should be doing this. But actually, because I said we need to do solidarity across, they've got their Arab Spring, we've got our UK autumn, you know, and maybe going into winter and spring as well, you never know. And that sense of solidarity across countries, across nationalities, standing together is an important part. And when you give solidarity, you have a greater sense of being able to demand solidarity back. And that sense of people working together, I think it's important that you have to be political, you have to sell Socialist Worker to equip people with the arguments to be political, because half people don't even know about Bahrain because it's not on the mainstream papers. So you have to do those sort of things. But the last thing you have to do is you have to be prepared to organise people, because you can have meetings and people can vote yes and then you can send them away again. And I think it is important that you get people to become stewards out of it, but even if they don't want to be stewards, will you take some leaflets round? Will you take some posters round? Will you become a rep for your area in terms of distribution? Will you come and do the lobby of this? But I think crucially, you see, Dave Prentice is being good at the moment in terms of he wants a strike and he wants a yes vote. But he's not really very good at it. Some of the leaflets are not political enough. You need to talk about the rich, and they don't. You need to talk about the fact that it's not just pensions, but it's the poverty, and he doesn't. You need to give people a free hand to do anything, and he's terrified if he does that he will lose control, and he's probably not wrong about that. But in a way, that's not a problem for us, it's only a problem for him. And that's why that sense of we have to be organised and not just rely on him to organise this fight for us is something that hits true with people. And that's why the Unite the Resistance Conference is important, because at some point he will want to do something that is about benefiting the Labour Party and working within the system. And for us, it's like the system doesn't matter, because the system doesn't deliver for you and me. It only delivers for the people at the top. And protecting the system is not our priority. In fact, it's not in our list, never mind at the top of our list. And that's why there are differences. And those differences means our side have to be organised. And we have to get people to come together to look at how do you organise a picket line, how do you organise a strike, how do you organise to carry on when they want you not to, how do you defeat the bureaucracy, how do you build solidarity, and how do you build be political. And that's what the Unite Resistance Conference offers people. We have to be prepared to do that, and it's no surprise that we've been at the heart of organising it, because solidarity and working together is absolutely crucial to the way the SWP work, and that's why you should join us as well.
Charlie speaks, I just remembered that afterwards, if you'd like to carry on the discussion, then you can stay here because they're going to open up the bar for you.
Mark mentioned about how in Poland the managers were having problems after the mass strikes. I know, there was a report yesterday about MPs actually saying how much desperate stress they were under. Because apparently everyone thinks they're on the make. It's said that whenever they go into a hairdresser's now, someone says to them, I suppose you put that on expenses. And the first time it's a joke, but the second time it's very stressful apparently for them.
Maybe their hair will fall out.
Of course the answer is yes, I suppose, will they put it on expenses. I mean, I do think it's important that we look at the scale of the counter-revolution that's being attempting to be pushed through, a social firestorm against people. I mean, someone mentioned about how in America they're talking about getting rid of the minimum wage. Don't forget the Tories already talked about doing this for disabled people, saying that they would need to price themselves into jobs and should voluntarily give up the middle. I don't know if people know how much the minimum wage is. It went up 1st of October, a few days ago. If you're 16 or 17, the minimum wage is £3.68 an hour. I mean, that's, to think that you could reduce that much further if you're an apprentice, that could be up to the age of 19. The minimum wage is £2.60 an hour. I mean, to think that anyone can live on £2.60 an hour, this is the spreading of poverty inside our communities, and particularly for young people. I mean, even if you're an adult, it's only £6.08 an hour, the minimum wage. So that, let's not get carried away that suddenly you move to a decent level. But if you're young, this is a real poverty scale, and this is what they're attempting to do with this. But just in itself, that simply makes you feel depressed, to be honest, about what's going on. So we need more than being depressed. We have to be both angry and find a way of dealing with, make that anger effective. I mean, someone asked about the private ownership of the banks. Quite right. Actually, it's worse than that. Because the really incredibly galling thing is that the banks that are publicly owned act just as badly as the ones who are private. We own the Royal Bank of Scotland, all of us. And yet the government says, we can't possibly tell them to lend money to anybody, or we can't tell them what to do. We're meant to run these damned institutions. I mean, George Bush nationalised more of the banking system than Hugo Chavez, or actually Lenin, when Lehman Brothers went under. It didn't make any difference in terms of the priorities of the banking system. It made no difference because capitalism is not really about men in top hats. It's about two separations. It's about the separation of ownership and control from the vast majority of people. We don't have any control over the economic levers in society. We don't own them. And the second separation is between the units of capital, which means there's no plan in the system, and there's this crazed competition that constantly pushes towards pushing the working class harder and harder to make more and more profits, to accumulate, to make more and more profit. That's what capitalism really is about. As long as that system exists, where you don't have real social and democratic ownership about the economic levers of power, and you don't have a plan by which society develops, which people democratically discuss, until you have that, you're going to have this system of competition and elite prosperity. And that's why we talk about a revolution. That's why we need more than simply reforms. But reforms do matter, because they make people reform. Every little victory we get will make our side feel stronger. If the electricians can win their dispute, everyone will feel stronger because of it. And they may win their dispute if they continue their strikes and if they get everybody out. If we win over pensions, everyone will feel stronger to fight over all the other elements of the welfare state and about everything else. We'll all feel stronger. And then we'll begin to challenge other things. I mean, the question of education, the content of education is much worse than it was 30 years ago. Much worse. Kids are drilled about exams from the earliest possible age. In the bloody nursery now, you're assessed. I mean, I didn't have a great education. We didn't go through the same level of exams that people go through now. I was shocked. I have two kids at secondary school in Hackney. Black History Month is partially delivered by the police. By the police, for God's sake. By the bloody police. The people who killed Mark Duggan, the people who killed Smiley Culture, the Hackney police who killed Colin Roach in Stoke Newington police station, are the people who are taking part in Black History Month in Hackney. Don't think, bloody proper discussion of slavery would be a big step forward, to be honest, for quite large sections. Now, the trouble is, the only thing worse than getting a capitalist education is no education at all, and that's what's being laid out for people.
You know, the removal of education maintenance allowance, the tripling of tuition fees, this is closing off a whole area of life for young people in Britain today, a whole lost generation on the level of the 1980s and worse again. We're not going to have it. We're not prepared to go through that again because we know what it means. You see, the 1980s were a period when you saw a glimpse of workers' power, but also what happens when our side loses. The miners' strike in 84-85, which I'm unfortunately old enough to remember, you saw how people could be transformed in mass struggle. Women and men who suddenly discovered their own abilities, their ability to speak in front of mass audiences, their ability to organise, their ability to have political activity for the first time in their life, to discover things about themselves and about the people around them. They learnt about the media. They learnt about all the ridiculous ways that we're divided by race, gender and sexual preference. All of these questions became up for discussion. I'll tell you, when we lost, it was bloody awful. All of that was taken back in lots of those communities. In lots of those places, it was devastation. And the danger is, if you have this depth of crisis, if it's like the 1930s, you have both the potential for revolution and the possibility of society being hurled backwards at the same time. The 1930s is about both sides of that. Everyone knows it's about Hitler, about Mussolini, it's about Franco. It's also about the Spanish Revolution, about the highest ever wave of struggle in the American working class. It's about the national unemployed workers' movement. It's about the mass strikes in France. It was the potential of revolution and the transformation of society. It's also the possibility of being hurled backwards. And that's how big the stakes are now. That's why this matters. It's not just about our pensions. Important though our pensions are, it's about something much bigger than that. And that's why we have to have a serious attempt to organise, to learn the lessons of history, and to build a movement that this time can be successful. Because if we're not successful, the stakes are very high against us. And capitalism will attempt to mystify everything. It does teach you you're powerless. The world around you teaches you're powerless. You look at the world, and women are second class compared to men in lots of areas. Black people are treated worse. You understand you don't have the ability to transform the world. It's a deadening feel about powerlessness and lack of ability to change the world. But at the same time, capitalism produces crisis, and it raises all these questions and pitches you into struggle, whether you like it or not. And in that course of that struggle, you can learn new lessons. And therefore, you have both the hope and the horror at the same time inside the system. That's what's facing us very, very clearly now. So we need concrete steps, and we need to have a movement that's going to fight for a revolution. Concrete steps are clear. The 19th of November conference, I'll tell you the speakers because it tells you something about it. We're going to have the leader of the Greek Electricians Union there. We're going to have Mohammed Shafiq, who's the leader of the Health Workers Union in Egypt, speak about it. We're going to have some speakers from the Spanish state about the movement there. That's important. It's important to have the trade union leaders, Mark Swatka, Matt Rack, these sorts of people speaking at it. It's important to have actually the most important people are the rank and file workers, the construction electricians who are going to be speaking at it, the people from Unilever in Liverpool are going to be speaking at it, people who are at the sharp edge of the struggle in Birmingham Council. This is the most important because none of these trade union leaders can be trusted. The trade union bureaucracy, we will work with them when they're fighting, but at the same time we have to create a movement that can act independently of them. Because when it comes to the crunch, we know that they will back off at crucial moments, and therefore we have to build a movement which is strong enough to lead without them being at the head of it. This is a big task for us. At the same time, we know there are tremendous opportunities to do it, and we need a movement which is capable of intervening politically. One of the great things about the construction electrician strikers at the moment is it has the power, or the beginnings of the power, that you saw at the Lindsay oil construction strikes 2 years ago, without that bloody appalling slogan of British jobs for British workers. It's cleansed it. The reason why is because people fought inside those strikes to drive that slogan out of the movement. We were part of that. We were central to doing that. Lots of people said ignore it. Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean something. It does mean something. If you have a movement that's divided by slogans of that sort, it can't be victorious and it can't unite the working class. You need people who at crucial moments will fight over issues like that. will fight to make sure that our movement isn't diverted by bureaucratic pressures, and you also need people who can push not simply to win over this or that issue, or this or that question, but will fight to transform the whole of the world. That's what the Socialist Workers Party is about. Maybe a university, it doesn't cost £9,000 a year to join, but it is an opportunity for you to learn from us, for us to learn to you. Anyone who joins, not just someone who is learning from the rest of the people in the organisation. They are bringing their own experience. We need your experience. We need your energy. We need your initiative. We need more socialists at the heart of the struggle, because there are very big stakes in front of us, and our side has to win.